By March 2011, the gravel lot outside the Agri-North dealership between Marshall and Grundy County at 7:10 in the morning could assign social class in under 5 seconds. Cody Jennings would pull in last, not because he was late, but because his 1997 Ford F-250 needed a slower turn over washboard gravel, especially with 412,000 miles on the odometer and rust chewing through both rocker panels. The passenger door was white primer from a salvage yard. The rest of the truck was faded blue. His coat was canvas, once brown, now the color of old rope, with 3 stitched elbows and a cuff repaired with baling twine thread that his sister had mailed him 10 years earlier. He carried a cracked green thermos and a spiral notebook with feed stains on the corners. Wade Mercer usually arrived first in a black crew cab with dealer plates and polished wheels. Wade was handsome in the way equipment sales rewarded. Pressed logo shirt, clean boots, teeth meant for showroom lighting. His voice carried across concrete like he had a microphone even when he did not. That morning, as on many mornings, the conversation around him centered on horsepower, deferred payment programs, and which lenders were still doing 7-year paper with seasonal schedules. 2 growers compared notes on their new tractors, both 310 horsepower, both financed, one at $1,850 a month, and the other at $1,920 once insurance riders were included. Cody nodded, poured coffee into a steel cup, and said nothing. His coffee cost 11 cents a mug. He knew because he tracked it. A 34-ounce can was $17.60 at the Marshalltown Farm Store when bought by the case with a winter promo, and each can gave him about 160 cups at his measured scoop. Paper filters added 1.2 cents per cup. Propane heat for the percolator, averaged across the month, added roughly 0.8 cents. With filter and heat included, the full ritual came to just under 13 cents per mug in most months. 11 cents for the coffee itself was fair. Men who carried $2.4 million in notes looked at that ritual and saw deprivation. Cody looked at it and saw control. The misread began there and hardened every season. The arithmetic mattered more than the coat seam. When people misjudged someone by a truck door and a coat seam, they were often missing the ledger that actually ran the farm. Cody had learned that ledger language as a boy in Black Hawk County. In January 1986, when he was 14, his father lost 280 rented acres and 120 owned acres in one auction day that began below freezing and ended with the yard stripped of machinery. Interest rates had climbed into numbers that now feel unreal, and variable notes that looked manageable at 9% had repriced far above that. His father had borrowed for expansion in 1979 and 1980, bought a larger planter, added hog finishing space, and signed what everyone around him signed because grain looked strong and lenders were telling families that scale would save them. Then corn softened, rates bit, and one bad harvest became 2. Cody remembered a lender folding papers on their kitchen table and saying, almost apologetically, that policy left no room. He remembered his father nodding as if he agreed with the weather. The numbers stayed with him longer than the shame did. Principal, $612,000. Repriced interest, above 17% on one note. Annual interest burden alone, over $100,000. Gross farm income in the final year before auction, under $290,000. Operating costs and labor swallowed the rest. The margin vanished, then the land vanished. Their family kept a small house on 6 acres because his mother's parents had put it in trust years earlier. Everything else was gone quietly. No speeches, no villains, just arithmetic that did not care who was decent. Cody worked evenings through high school and full-time after graduation, first at a welding shop in Waterloo for $8.25 an hour, then at a grain elevator where overtime during harvest pushed his annual pay to $27,400 before taxes. He lived with 2 roommates in a trailer and paid $180 a month in rent. By 1993, he had saved $19,600 cash and bought his first 40 acres near Rhinebeck at $1,180 per acre from an older widow who wanted a quick close and no financing uncertainty. Purchase price was $47,200. Closing costs and survey added $1,140. He paid all of it with cashier checks and had $2,900 left for seed, fuel, and repairs. His banker, who had expected a mortgage application, asked whether he wanted to preserve liquidity and borrow half at 8.2%. Cody said politely, no. From that year forward, he ran one rule that he expressed in 12 words or fewer whenever someone pushed him. If he could not pay cash, he could not afford it. It sounded rigid to people who believed leverage was a sign of confidence. To Cody, it was memory translated into policy. By harvest 1998, he had moved from patchwork renting into a durable base, 40 acres owned, 120 rented on crop share, 1 used international harvester, 1,086 bought for $9,400, 1 18-foot disc at $750, and a grain drill for $320 from an estate sale where the widow cried when the bidding started. He fixed his own hydraulic lines, rebuilt pumps at night, and learned that a $400 repair done in November could prevent a $4,000 emergency in May. In 2001, he purchased an adjoining 80 acres at $1,950 per acre, total $156,000, including fees, again with cash accumulated over 4 seasons, and one-side business welding gates and trailer hitches for neighbors. In 2004, he added another 120 acres at $2,240 per acre after a retiring cousin preferred a clean sale over a finance contract. In 2007, while peers traded up, Cody set aside $214,000 in a money market yielding a modest return and slept better than men with newer paint. The discipline looked old even then. He kept envelopes for categories inside a steel file drawer in his kitchen. Seed, fuel, repairs, property tax, insurance, household, reserve. Household was the smallest. In 2010, his annual living budget, not farm operating budget, was $11,940 total. Utilities were $3,620. Food was $5,120, helped by a large garden, venison, and buying staples in bulk. Clothing was $540, mostly work gloves and insulated socks. Vehicle registration and personal fuel were $1,860. There were no restaurant tabs to speak of, no subscription creep, no credit card balances rolling into the next month. He used a card for record keeping and paid it weekly. By the second week of October 2010, neighbors had started calling him careful in the tone people use when they mean afraid. At co-op meetings, younger growers joked that he could hear a dollar bill hit the floor in the next county. Cody usually answered with a half smile, then asked what their variable rates were doing after reset. That ended the laughter most nights, not because he won arguments, because numbers did. His machinery row looked like evidence against him. Paint faded, seats patched. One combine old enough that Wade Mercer once referred to it as museum adjacent in front of a parts counter crowd. Yet every unit was maintained to the point of reliability. He tracked engine hours, preemptive part replacement, and downtime cost per acre with the same care he gave grain contracts. In 2009, he calculated that keeping his older combine running required $12,400 in annual repairs and maintenance. A new financed replacement he was offered would have required $3,980 monthly for equipment payment, plus insurance, plus higher depreciation, putting first-year cash outflow above $56,000 before fuel. His acres did not justify that burden. He chose repairs and banked the difference. His ledger from those years read like a metronome. 2006, net operating surplus, $132,400. Reserve account, $486,000. 2007, surplus, $149,800. Bought 60 acres cash at $2,980 per acre. Reserve $454,000 after close. 2008, surplus $171,200. No major purchases. Reserve $625,200. 2009, surplus $118,600 after wet spring delays. Spent $14,900 on repairs. No debt added. 2010, surplus $164,300. Property tax paid in full. Reserve $812,700. 2011 opening balance. Cash and equivalents $903,400. Machinery notes 0. Consumer debt 0. When spring meetings resumed in 2011, none of that was visible from the parking lot. People saw a rusted truck and a patched coat and assumed fragility. Wade Mercer saw a likely commission if he could persuade Cody that dignity required newer steel. Cody saw interest risk waiting for the first bad weather cycle. By late February 2012, the dealership mailed embossed invitations for its spring showcase, complete with financing specials expiring before pre-harvest. 30 growers confirmed attendance. Wade made sure Cody got a call, then a second call, then a final reminder the night before. Cody wrote the date in his notebook, next to a penciled line that had guided him since he was 14, and standing in an auction yard with his father. Debt is patient until weather turns, and then it collects. The next morning, March 1st, 2012, the Agri-North Showcase lot was lined with flags, polished hoods, and temporary financing banners that promised efficiency and growth in the block red letters. Wade Mercer stood near the entrance with a tablet in one hand and a stainless travel mug in the other, greeting each arrival like a host at a wedding reception. Cody Jennings came in slow at 8:12, the same faded blue truck rattling over the curb cut. The white primer door still louder than any billboard around him. He stepped out in that canvas coat, same three-stitched elbows, same cracked thermos, and mud on boots that had been cleaned but never fully restored to a showroom idea of clean. The men around the new machines did what people do when hierarchy feels obvious. They glanced once at the truck, once at the coat, and then past him as if the decision had been made. One younger operator, carrying a brochure for a 370-horsepower track tractor, leaned toward another and asked whether Cody was there for parts salvage or coffee. Wade heard it, smiled without correcting it, and guided the group toward a combine parked on fresh gravel with a sticker price of $286,000 and a placard showing 7-year financing at 7.4%. Monthly payment, $4,298 before insurance. Annual cash commitment, with insurance rider and maintenance reserve, $57,976. Wade tapped the placard and raised his voice so all 30 growers could hear. He talked about yield loss from untimely harvest, downtime risk, labor efficiency, resale curves, and the danger of what he called emotional attachment to outdated steel. Then he turned to Cody with practiced warmth and asked if he wanted the worksheet run on 1,140 acres with a pre-harvest incentive discount if he signed by March 15th. Cody took one sip from his steel cup and shook his head once. Wade laughed. Not a hostile bark, a public laugh that carried. Cody, small thinking gets small futures. You can keep fixing old iron or you can farm like this decade. The silence afterward held for a beat too long. Cody set the cup down on a folded brochure and answered in 9 words, same tone he used to discuss seed depth. If I cannot pay cash, I cannot afford it. Someone exhaled through his nose. Someone else looked down at his boots. Wade recovered quickly and moved to another prospect, but the line had already landed. By 11:30, the story was moving through coffee counters from Conrad to Hudson. By evening, men repeated Cody's sentence as evidence of caution, fear, principle, stubbornness, wisdom, or pride, depending on which debt schedule they carried home. Before we go any further, if you want to see how one sentence can protect decades of work when weather turns hard, stay with this all the way through, because the arithmetic that follows is the whole point. Cody did not defend himself at supper. He heated leftover beans, wrote fuel gallons in his notebook, and pulled out an older ledger from a shelf beside the kitchen table. The table had a burn mark near the corner from his father's soldering iron, and a gouge from a dropped wrench that had never been sanded out. He opened to 1994 and ran one finger down the entries. Spring fertilizer, $5,460, seed corn, $4,980, diesel and propane, $3,210, crop insurance premium, $2,140. Gross from first full harvest cycle across owned and rented ground, $68,740. Net after operating cost and rent share, $19,380. He had kept $12,000 in reserve and used $7,200 to prepay next season input discounts. No loans. That pattern was not inherited from comfort. It was assembled from loss, labor, and one practical mentor who never made speeches. In 1992, when Cody was still welding days and loading trucks nights, an older farmer named Harold Veenstra let him lease 60 acres on crop share after 2 local lenders told Cody he was undercapitalized for independent expansion. Harold's terms fit on one page. 1/3 crop share. Tenant handles fuel and labor, no machinery borrowing without explicit agreement, and no banknote tied to Harold's land. Pay me when you can was the spirit, but the line underneath it was stricter. Do not bet the farm on one good year. Harold died in 2008 at 79, and by then Cody had already repaid that trust many times over by keeping Harold's acres productive, taxes current, and drainage maintained without being asked. At the funeral luncheon, Harold's daughter Lena told Cody her father had kept a folded card in his wallet with Cody's 1992 yield notes and one sentence on the back: "This kid writes every dollar down." Lena later sold Cody 80 acres on a clean cash, close at $2,240 per acre, because she wanted certainty more than top bid drama. That choice saved her probate delays and legal fees that would have consumed nearly $19,000 in another structure. Cody paid $179,200 plus $3,400 closing costs and left with 0 contingencies and 0 renegotiation. 3 days after the showcase, he was under his machine shed replacing feeder house chain links on the old combine he had been mocked for keeping. Parts bill, $682. Shop towels, solvent, and bearings, $119. Labor, his own, 8 hours on concrete and 1 hour testing under load. Dealer labor estimate for equivalent work package, $2,940 plus transport. He logged both numbers, not for bragging rights, but because every season became a comparison between money spent and money preserved. Preserved money bought options. Options lowered risk. Lower risk kept him independent when markets turned mean. His no-debt rule was not absolute in theory. It was conditional in practice. He would consider financing only if 4 tests passed on paper at the same time. First, debt service under 12% of trailing 3-year average net farm income. Second, fixed rate only, no repricing ladder. Third, full payoff capacity inside 36 months from existing liquid reserves. Fourth, asset life and maintenance profile had to beat used equipment alternatives by at least 20% on a cost per acre basis. In 2 decades of spreadsheets, no offered package passed all 4 tests. Most failed 2 before lunch. The spring of 2012 kept proving why. Input prices climbed, rain failed in key weeks. By July, local yield estimates were being revised downward almost every advisory call. Corn contracts that had flirted with $7.14 backed down to $5.02. Growers with variable operating lines watched basis risk and rate risk stack together. Cody watched too, but from a different position. He had prepaid a meaningful share of fertilizer and chemical in winter, carried no machinery notes, and had $903,400 in cash and equivalents at 2011 opening, then added to that through disciplined seasons before this drought year ever began. He could endure slim margins without emergency borrowing. His early discipline looked plain from the road and meticulous on paper. He bought fluids in pallet quantities each January, reducing per-gallon hydraulic oil cost from 14.80 to 11.95. He replaced wear parts before failure windows, not after breakdown. He planted with calibrated speed targets that favored uniform stands over aggressive acreage races. He tracked downtime in minutes and attached a dollar value to each hour during harvest based on expected moisture loss and weather forecast. He rotated truck tires by log tread depth, not by habit, stretching replacement cycles by roughly 8 months. Small choices repeated, quiet compounding. At county auctions, he stood in back, hands in coat pockets, bidding only after 3 passes around the machine and 1 look at service records if they existed. In April 2013, he bought 160 adjacent acres from a retiring neighbor for $4,320 per acre in cash, $691,200 total, plus $11,760 in title and transfer costs. No bridge note, no refinance promise. In 2014, he purchased a used 2001 combine at $41,000 and put $6,800 in parts into it before harvest. Total in-service cost, $47,800. Comparable new unit offered that year, $312,000 with financing that would have pushed first-year outflow beyond $60,000. The difference between those paths in year 1 alone was more than $12,000 after repair assumptions, and the multi-year spread was far larger. His household numbers remained almost stubbornly small. Property tax on owned ground rose with assessed values, reaching $38,400 by 2018, but personal spending stayed restrained. Utilities $3,900, food $5,480, clothing $620. No revolving consumer balances, no vacation debt disguised as reward. Coffee still measured by scoop and costed by can. 11 cents for grounds, fractions for filter and heat. People heard that and smiled like it was folklore. Cody heard it and translated it. Attention creates surplus. The larger culture around him rewarded visible scale, and many good operators followed that signal in good faith. Some were pressured by landlords, some by family expectations, some by the fear of being left behind by acreage consolidation. Cody understood that pressure because he lived in the same coffee shops and sold into the same elevators. He never mocked it. He just refused to finance his peace of mind. By harvest, 2012, his yield had fallen to 126 bushels per acre across 1,140 acres, and the margin was thinner than anyone wanted. Yet after inputs, he still cleared $148 per acre, posting a $168,720 operating surplus because fixed land payments were zero on most of his base and machinery debt was still zero across the row. The same drought that exposed weak roots in financed operations validated his plain equation one more time. In the months that followed, the men who had laughed at his coat began asking quieter questions at the edge of meetings, usually after others left. How much reserve was enough? How to evaluate a note beyond the monthly payment? Whether repairs could beat replacement if planned earlier. Cody answered in short lines and handed over no sermons. Keep records. No cost per acre. Keep cash. Do not sign what weather can punish. He still drove home in the rusted truck with one mismatched door, still parked by the same shed, still wrote numbers at the same scarred table under a yellow bulb that flickered once before settling. From the road, nothing about the place announced wealth. From the ledger, the trajectory was already clear. In March of 2012, with the dealership laughter still circulating through coffee shops, Cody went back to what he trusted most: dated entries, reconciled receipts, and decisions that had to survive bad years on paper before they touched a field. He opened a new ledger column labeled Stress Case and began running every major choice against three scenarios: corn at $4.40, soybeans at $10.20, and yield reductions between 12% and 22%. If a purchase could not clear all three, it stayed out. That single column shaped the next 6 years more than any market newsletter. His year-by-year progression after the drought did not look dramatic from the road, but it was mathematically relentless. 2013, 1,140 acres farmed. Average corn yield recovered to 161 bushels per acre, soybeans to 47.2 bushels. Gross revenue, including crop insurance carryover and basis gains, reached $1,286,400. Total operating expense was $924,870. Operating surplus, $361,530. In April, he bought 160 adjacent acres at $4,320 per acre for $691,200 cash, with $11,760 in closing costs. Year-end liquid reserves after purchase and taxes, $1,044,980. 2014. Weather steadied, but equipment pressure rose. He purchased the used 2001 combine at auction for $41,000 and installed $6,800 in parts, bringing total in-service costs to $47,800. Equivalent finance replacement quoted at $312,000 would have required $4,612 per month at prevailing terms, or $55,344 annually before insurance. Cody's actual first-year combine cash burden, including parts and preventive maintenance, stayed under 19,300. Farmed acres, 1,320. Operating surplus, $2,110. He placed $250,000 into a treasury ladder averaging 2.1%. 2015. Input costs softened modestly, but land pricing remained firm. He bought 180 acres from an estate near Dyke at $4,980 per acre, $896,400 total, plus $14,200 in legal and title expense. Acres farmed rose to 1,570. Corn average, 173 bushels. Soybeans, 50.1. Surplus, $438,620 after all operating costs and tax obligations. Year-end reserves and short-term instruments combined, $1,228,740. 2016. Corn slipped to $3.64 in key contract windows, reminding everyone that high-yield years could still punish weak margins. Cody made no machinery upgrade, spent $22,460 on repairs across tractor hydraulics, grain cart augers, and one truck transmission rebuild, and still avoided financing. He acquired 220 acres from a retiring couple in Black Hawk County at $5,140 per acre, $1,130,800 cash. Acres farmed, 1,920. Operating surplus narrowed to 289,970, then stabilized through disciplined input timing and storage basis improvement. Year-end liquidity, $1,041,300, despite the land purchase. 2017. This was the year many expected him to slow. Instead, he expanded only where cash flow allowed certainty. He bought 120 acres at $5,260 per acre, $631,200, from a family that wanted immediate settlement for medical and retirement planning. He also secured a 5-year crop share lease on 260 acres with conservative terms, tied to actual yields, not speculative price floors. Acres controlled reached 2,180. Surplus, 417,880. Treasury and cash equivalents, 1,386,500. 2018. Another 120 acres closed at $5,480 per acre. $657,600 total. No debt attached. He entered harvest controlling 2,460 acres, with 2,020 owned free and clear and the remainder leased under terms he could exit without penalty. Property tax on owned ground, $38,400. Utilities, $3,900. Food, $5,480. Clothing, $620. Consumer debt, $0. Machinery notes, $0. Operating surplus for the year, $452,300. Audited net worth crossed $9.8 million before year-end grain revaluation. None of those entries required a heroic year. They required a refusal to convert temporary optimism into fixed obligations. By the second week of November 2018, he had another page in the same notebook titled Cost of Looking Successful. Under it, he listed what neighbors were carrying to maintain modern equipment cycles. Combine note, $4,900 monthly. Tractor package, $3,200 monthly. Precision add-ons, $1,150 monthly. Annual insurance uplift, $9,600. Software and service subscriptions, $4,200. Total annual fixed burden in one representative case, $118,200, before diesel, labor, seed, or fertilizer. Cody compared that with his own annual machinery burden, averaged over 5 years, including repairs and replacements, 41,700. The spread was 76,500 per year. Over 10 years without compounding, that was 765,000. With conservative reinvestment, the gap moved past 1 million. Let me stop here and ask you something. If your operation needed perfect weather and high prices just to meet monthly notes, is that growth or is it fragility dressed as growth? Put your answer in the comments when this story reaches you, because this is the exact question that separated survival from foreclosure in these counties. The contrast with his peers was never a morality play. It was a sequence of good people making rational decisions inside an irrational credit cycle. Eli Hartman was not reckless. Eli was diligent, first in and last out during planning, and he had built a respected row crop operation with his wife and 2 hired hands. But he refinanced 3 times between 2013 and 2017 to roll equipment and land obligations into structures that looked manageable at signing. By early 2018, he owed $1.9 million across variable and reset notes. At 5.1%, annual interest was painful, but survivable. At 8.4%, after resets and penalties, interest alone ran near $159,600 before principal. One wet fall and 1 week pricing window later, he fell behind. He lost 640 acres at auction. He did not lose his work ethic. He lost to arithmetic and timing. Denise Kroll and her brother Jared faced a different trap. They modernized quickly after inheriting partial management responsibility, carrying $842,000 in equipment debt at 9.1% blended rates because dealers and lenders both forecasted stronger margins and lower repair risk from new units. Their monthly schedule approached $14,700 across multiple notes. In strong years, the payments cleared. When fuel and chemical costs rose while contracts softened, November cash flow could not absorb principal plus interest. They missed deadlines, paid penalties, sold stored grain early at unfavorable basis, and still came up short. Their records were not sloppy. Their leverage was simply too tight for volatile years. Marvin Pike expanded hog barns on a $1.2 million note after integrator projections suggested stable throughput and feed ratios that looked robust in slide decks. Marvin had farmed long enough to remember lean cycles, yet he believed scale would protect his family because fixed contracts were marketed as safety. Then feed costs spiked. Ventilation upgrades were mandated sooner than modeled, and labor turnover increased his operating stress. Debt service kept ticking every month regardless of barn performance. Within 3 seasons, he liquidated the hog side and sold machinery to cover shortfalls. He went under with dignity and paid what he could. He still attended funerals, still helped neighbors move equipment, still showed up. Ruben Salas made a decision out of loyalty rather than ambition. He guaranteed his son Mateo's $680,000 operating line to keep a multi-generational plan alive after 2 weak crop years. The guarantee shifted lender confidence for a season, then 2 failed crops, and rising input costs pushed the account into default territory. Because Ruben had signed as guarantor, his own balance sheet absorbed the shock. He filed Chapter 12, restructured under court supervision, and spent years unwinding obligations he never intended to carry at that scale. No one in Marshall County who knew him called him foolish. They called him a father. These were the casualties Cody had in mind each time someone called him stubborn. He did not say their names publicly. He wrote private notes beside his stress case columns. Eli interest reset risk. Denise November compression. Marvin feed volatility. Reuben guarantee contagion. The notes were not criticism. They were warnings. Then the broader crisis tightened. During 2018 and into 2019, rate pressure combined with trade uncertainty and basis volatility in ways that punished debt-heavy structures first. Operating lines repriced. Renewal terms shortened. Lenders demanded more frequent reporting and stronger collateral margins. Fertilizer pricing whipsawed planning windows. Grain markets offered brief rallies that disappeared before many could lock profitable volumes. Some county elevators widened basis by 18 to 27 cents compared with prior year averages during key delivery weeks, taking another thin slice out of already narrow margins. On financed operations, small slices became fatal. Cody's survival mechanics were plain. Zero machinery debt meant no mandatory monthly equipment outflow during weak pricing windows. High-owned acre ratio meant fixed land payments were low relative to revenue. Large liquid reserves allowed him to buy inputs in off-peak periods and avoid emergency credit purchases. He had no variable note that could jump from manageable to predatory in one reset letter. When corn sat below preferred pricing, he could store and wait. When repairs hit in clusters, he paid cash and kept moving. In May 2019, one local lender circulated revised covenants requiring certain borrowers to hold debt service coverage ratios above 1.25 or face corrective action plans. Several operators in 3 counties fell below threshold by midsummer. Corrective plans usually meant asset sales. Asset sales under pressure usually meant discounts. Cody did not celebrate any of it. He attended one auction where a neighbor's daughter stood beside a box of office binders and tried not to cry as strangers priced out 30 years of machinery history in under 2 hours. He bought nothing that day. 3 days later, he rewrote his own reserve policy in ink. Minimum liquid buffer equal to 2 full operating years at stress case pricing. At that point, his required minimum was $2,950,000. He was already close, but he tightened spending anyway. Coffee remained measured. Truck remained unreplaced. The patched coat remained in service through another winter. By late August 2019, foreclosure filings and distressed loan pools were no longer private rumor. They were itemized in notices and legal postings. One Grundy County package drew unusual attention because it bundled 420 acres tied to 3 separate, troubled loans. Each originated in years when confidence was cheap and money was marketed as a tool rather than a liability. Growers talked about it at parts counters and feed stores, most assuming institutional buyers would take it. Cody read the listing, clipped the terms, and placed the paper in his ledger. From the road, nothing about his place announced what he was preparing to do next. The foreclosure auction opened at 9 in the morning on a windy Thursday in September 2019, in a metal-sided county building that smelled like coffee steam and damp jackets. The 420-acre package drew bankers, 2 regional investment groups, 6 local operators, and Wade Mercer, who stood near the back rail with a legal pad and the same polished boots he had worn at the showcase years earlier. Cody Jennings came in quietly, took a folding chair near the aisle, and set his notebook on his knee. The white primer door on his truck was visible through the lot fence. Men noticed it and then looked away. Bidding moved faster than expected because the tract had tiled sections, good access, and 3 drainage improvements already permitted. The opening call was $1,680,000. An investment group pushed to $1,940,000. A local partnership went to $2,050,000, hesitated, and dropped out. At $2,120,000, there were only two bidders left. Cody raised a hand at $2,184,000. The auctioneer asked for $2,200,000. Silence. He asked again. Silence held. Hammer down. Sold at $2,184,000. The clerk asked for proof of funds before noon settlement. Cody handed over a cashier check for the full amount and transfer fees. Total draft $2,231,860. She checked the routing number, then called the issuing bank. Then she called again from a second line. Procedure for unusually large same-day closings. Both confirmations came back immediate and clean. A lender representative, surprised by the speed, asked whether Cody had liquidated grain contracts to make the bid. Cody answered in 5 words. No. Separate purchase account. The second document was what changed the room. It was a 1-page verification letter required by the trustee because competing parties had challenged local buyers in prior auctions. It listed unrestricted reserve balances across treasury ladders and cash equivalents at $3,642,118, separate from the settlement draft. By noon, the story had moved from the clerk desk to the parking lot, and by late afternoon, people who had treated Cody as undercapitalized had the number in their phones. Liquid reserves above $3.6 million. Land and inventory pushing audited net worth to $12.4 million. Wade did not argue. He folded his pad once and left without speaking to anyone. Cody did not make a speech outside the building. He loaded his folder into the truck, drove 27 miles back toward his place, and stopped at the same farm store where he bought bulk coffee. He picked up 2 34-ounce cans at $17.60 each. The cashier, who had heard the auction outcome already, asked whether he was celebrating. Cody looked at the receipt, then at the shelf where filters were stocked. Just restocking. By the first week of October 2019, the attention had shifted from surprise to interpretation. Some called the auction proof that he had been hiding money. Others called it luck and timing. The people who knew his records understood it was neither. It was accumulated optionality, no forced payments, years of surplus, disciplined land purchases, and assets bought only when cash was already earned. That was the moment his own framework moved one step further. Private safety had been achieved. Community fragility had not. He could keep compounding for himself, or he could build a structure that lowered failure risk for people who still had skill, but had run out of margin. The first planning session happened at his kitchen table, under the same yellow bulb, with Lena Veenstra, a Waterloo accountant named Paul Norum, and a farm attorney from Cedar Falls named Iris Malloy. They worked through legal design, tax treatment, default controls, and one recurring concern: how to provide relief without subsidizing the same leverage habits that had broken neighbors. Cody set the boundary early. No grant could finance image upgrades. No loan could refinance consumer spending. Every dollar had to tie to operating continuity, repair first equipment logic, or land stability with clear repayment schedules. If you are learning something from this, pass it to one person who thinks wealth is about visible spending, because this was the opposite in practice and it worked under pressure. By January 2020, the structure was filed and funded. The Jennings Working Acres Fund opened with a $4 million endowment held in a conservative mix: 52% short-duration Treasury notes, 28% cash equivalents, 20% intermediate municipal bonds from in-state issuers. Expected annual yield under base assumptions was 2.9%, net of administrative costs, enough to support operations while preserving principal if repayment discipline held. The lending arm offered zero-interest operating loans capped at $120,000 with repayment windows from 3 to 7 years depending on crop cycle and collateral profile. The grant arm capped equipment awards at $28,000 and required repair first plans with a documented labor and parts estimates. One condition was non-negotiable. Each recipient mentored another producer for 2 years with quarterly ledger review. The first round included 4 people from the same counties where the laughter had started. Eli Hartman received a $120,000 zero-interest operating loan on a 5-year term after his auction loss, paired with a mandatory acreage cap and a crop share lease design that prevented overexpansion. Year 1 repayment was set at $18,000 with step-ups tied to realized margins, not projections. He used the funds for seed, fertilizer, and a used grain cart overhaul, not land bidding. By year 2, he was current and had reduced custom work costs by 14% through better scheduling. Denise Kroll and Jared Kroll received a $28,000 repair first grant and a $96,000 operating line at zero interest, contingent on selling one underutilized finance unit and consolidating tillage passes to lower fuel burn. Their first season under the plan cut fixed machinery outflow by $63,400. They made every scheduled payment in year 1 and rebuilt vendor terms that had been restricted during their penalty period. Marvin Pike did not return to hog expansion. He applied for a $44,000 transition loan to retrain and certify as a machinery diagnostic technician, with a repayment plan linked to wages from a regional service shop. The committee approved it with a shorter 4-year schedule and a requirement that he provide winter maintenance workshops for young operators. He did, and attendance grew from 9 to 31 in 2 seasons. Mateo Salas, with Reuben co-signing removed by design, received an $88,000 operating loan and a strict stress case covenant based on Cody's old notebook model. Corn and soybean price assumptions were locked below optimistic forecasts, and borrowing capacity adjusted quarterly. The result was slower expansion, but stable coverage. Reuben kept his retirement path intact instead of reabsorbing risk through another guarantee. The public proving ground came in February 2021 at the County Farm Bureau, winter meeting with 147 people in the room, folding chairs lined to the wall, projector humming, coffee urns near the side door. Cody stood for less than 5 minutes. He did not narrate his life. He did not lecture anyone about mistakes. He read the fund rules, the opening numbers, and the mentorship condition. Then recipients presented their ledgers, pages on a screen, paid columns, reduced fixed burdens, no spin language. Wade Mercer took the floor from the side aisle and tried one final argument about modern leverage and missed growth without aggressive financing. The room listened politely. Then Eli displayed his debt service chart, showing what a variable reset had done to his old structure and what zero-interest staged repayment had done to his current one. Denise followed with side-by-side machinery burden figures. Previous annual fixed obligations, $176,400. Revised burden, $98,700, including repairs, insurance, and one remaining note. Marvin showed wage progression and repayment status from his technician track. Mateo showed stress case compliance across 3 quarters with no covenant breach. When the questions ended, Wade spoke again, this time shorter. I confused commission volume with farm health. It was not dramatic. It was accurate. 6 months later, he closed his high-interest financing division, sold that piece of his book, and shifted toward used equipment consulting with lower leverage planning packages for smaller operators. Cody's largest direct intervention came after that meeting, when a lender pool moved 190 acres, tied to Denise Kroll's family history, into a disposition channel. Ask price was $836,000. Cody bought it at cost and resold it to Denise and Jared on a 15-year zero-interest note with annual payments of $55,733 and a clause allowing one deferred installment every 5 years if county yields dropped below a preset threshold. No balloon, no hidden fee schedule. They signed at Iris Malloy's office, and Denise cried after the second signature, not from relief alone, but from the end of uncertainty. The deeper examination was in the arithmetic, and Cody insisted it be published to participants each winter so the philosophy could be tested, not admired. From 2012 through 2019, the decision to avoid 2 major financed equipment cycles preserved more than monthly cash flow. The 2012 combine offer at $286,000, 7.4% over 7 years, carried payments of $4,298 monthly and total repayment of $361,032 before insurance and service packages. The 2014 replacement pressure at $312,000, quoted near 6.8%, implied roughly $4,612 monthly and $387,408 total over term. Combined scheduled repayment, $748,440. Estimated insurance and service uplift across those terms, $96,000. Total cash burden avoided, about $844,440. Cody's actual repair and maintenance cost on used units for comparable periods was $312,600. Net preserved capital, $531,840, then reinvested into land and reserves. Land arithmetic compounded the result. Cash purchases between 2013 and 2019 added 1,100 acres at blended acquisition cost near $4,999 per acre. Total $5,498,000, including closes and legal fees. Conservative 2019 appraised value on those same acres averaged $5,680, placing value near $6,248,000. Unrealized gain on that block alone, roughly $750,000, while carrying cost, stayed manageable because there was no note interest to service. The fund's own early metrics also held under scrutiny. Through its first operating window, approved commitments reached $1,476,000 across loans and grants, with 100% of recipients current on required reporting and 94% current on scheduled principal by dollar volume. Default reserve assumptions had modeled 12% impairment in a week cycle. Actual impairment in the first period was 0. Administrative expense ratio stayed below 1.8% because Cody drew no salary, and committee stipends were modest. Mentorship compliance hit full participation, which mattered more than optics because quarter-by-quarter ledger reviews prevented small mistakes from compounding into crisis. That was the point he had been making since the patched coat years. Now visible beyond his own acreage, debt freedom was not a personality trait. It was a risk architecture. Quiet discipline did not just protect one operator. Properly structured, it could restore multiple balance sheets, keep families on land, and convert private net worth into regional durability without spectacle. Cody still drove home in the same rusted truck that evening, still measured coffee by scoop, and still wrote the day's numbers before he slept. The next morning, he opened a fresh page and wrote a new header in block letters. Recipient tracking, quarterly. He did not trust memory when livelihoods were involved. He logged disbursement dates, intended use, weather notes, market prices, repayment status, and one extra line that did not appear in bank documents. Mentoring delivered, yes or no. Through the spring of 2021, the first 4 recipients met every reporting deadline. Eli Hartman planted fewer acres than he wanted, by design, and that restraint stabilized him faster than expansion would have. He worked 240 leased acres under a conservative crop share, carried no machinery note, and used the fund loan exactly as approved. Seed, fertility, and 1 grain cart overhaul that lowered harvest delays. His first-year gross came in at $286,400. Operating costs were $214,900. He paid $18,000 toward principal on schedule and set aside another $22,000 reserve. The old version of Eli would have rolled that reserve into a bigger lease. The new version kept it liquid. Denise Kroll and Jared Kroll had the hardest first season emotionally, because repairing a damaged balance sheet in public feels like confession, even when no one asks for one. They sold 1 underused finance tractor, accepted a lower acreage race, and rebuilt around reliability. Their machinery burden dropped from $176,400 annually to $98,700, with repairs included. Diesel use fell 11% after past consolidation. In year 1, they paid $24,000 principal and finished current on every vendor account for the first time in 3 cycles. In year 2, they paid $31,200 and rebuilt their fertilizer prepay discount status, which saved $9,800 in spring input costs. By the 3rd winter, they were current on the 15-year zero-interest 190-acre note and had not used the deferred installment clause once. Marvin Pike transitioned out of barn debt culture and into steady wage arithmetic. His diagnostic technician certification cost less than 1/4 of what 1 bad feed quarter had once cost him. He started at $29 an hour, moved to $34 after 18 months, then to $38 with field call premiums. He repaid his transition loan on the 4-year schedule, no late installments, and by 2024 he had no outstanding farm liabilities at all. He still carried grief for the barn years, but the fear had left his posture. Every January he taught winter maintenance workshops as required, and those sessions saved other operators measurable money. One group of 12 reported combined in-season repair avoidance of $86,000 over 2 years through preventive work alone. Mateo Salas became the model for the stress case covenant. Under the old pattern, he had planned around best-case yields and average prices. Under Cody's model, he planned around weaker prices and below-trend yields, then treated any upside as reserve fuel. He paid down $14,000 in year 1, $16,500 in year 2, and $19,000 in year 3 while never breaching coverage requirements. Ruben Salas watched that progression from close range and finally stepped out of guarantor anxiety. By late 2023, Ruben settled his restructured obligations in full, moved into retirement in Waterloo, and started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. By the 2nd week of February 2022, the fund had moved from experiment to institution. Approved commitments reached $1,980,000. Repayment by dollar volume stayed above 95%. Administrative expense held below 2%. More important, mentorship compliance stayed near total because Cody enforced it with the same firmness he used on cash discipline. If a recipient skipped quarterly ledger review with their assigned mentee, disbursement paused. No exceptions. By harvest 2023, the cascade was visible across counties. Operators taught by first-round recipients avoided high payment machinery cycles, reduced fixed monthly burn, and built reserves before bidding for acres. The arithmetic of the multiplier effect was not abstract by then. From 2021 through 2025, the Jennings Working Acres Fund issued $2,760,000 to 22 producers, $2,268,000 in zero-interest operating loans and $492,000 in repair first grants. Repayment rate by principal due, 97%. Acres directly stabilized under recipient operations, 6,900. Estimated forced sale acres avoided, based on lender covenant thresholds and recipient pre-fund statements, 1,140. Aggregate fixed cost reduction among participating operations over the period, 3,480,000, driven by debt restructuring, repair first planning, and canceled high-interest equipment plans. That was how one endowment changed behavior beyond one balance sheet. A $120,000 loan to Eli did not just protect Eli. It allowed him to mentor two younger operators who then declined aggressive financing offers that would have added 7,800 combined monthly obligations. Denise and Jared mentored a neighboring pair who adopted quarterly reserve targets and avoided a $402,000 equipment package at 8.3%. Marvin's maintenance workshops cut emergency downtime across multiple farms and lowered repair volatility that usually pushed people into short-term credit. Mateo's stress case template circulated in printed form at winter meetings until even skeptical lenders started requesting similar projections before renewal. Wade Mercer watched all of it from the edge at first, then from inside the change. He closed his high-interest financing division 6 months after his public admission, but the deeper shift took longer and cost him pride before it paid him credibility. In 2022, he sold his dealership stake for $1,740,000 before taxes, cleared remaining personal obligations, and kept a smaller consulting practice focused on used equipment economics and lower leverage planning. The irony was plain and unspoken. He earned stable income, teaching the caution he once dismissed. In May 2023, he drove to Cody's farm in a clean but no longer flashy pickup and walked the machinery row without sales language. The old International Harvester 1086 was still there. The 2001 combine he had mocked as outdated was still productive. Hours logged, maintenance current. Wade asked one question that carried more weight than his old speeches. "What did I miss?" Cody answered in 7 words. "Payment schedules do not care about weather." Wade wrote that sentence on a yellow pad and started using it in his own workshops, usually after showing debt service charts from failed expansions and repaired operations. By 2024, he was teaching 3 county sessions each winter with Iris Malloy and Paul Norum as guest presenters, covering fixed versus variable risk, covenant pressure, and repair-first capital planning. Attendance grew because he did not posture anymore. He used his own old pitch sheets as caution exhibits. He named his error directly. Commission volume had looked like progress because nobody priced the downside honestly. Farmers who had once trusted him for financing now trusted him for restraint. It did not erase prior damage, but it redirected the next cycle. By late September 2025, roll call in 3 counties sounded very different than it had in 2012, and every name in this story had a clear line. Cody Jennings still lived in the same house, still kept envelopes in the steel drawer, still drove the 1997 Ford F-250, with the white primer door and 412,000 miles long since passed. He had repaired the steering twice, replaced brake lines, and ignored advice to replace it for appearance alone. His coffee grounds still penciled at 11 cents per mug before filter and heat fractions. His 2025 audited net worth stood at $23.8 million across land, storage equity, treasury ladders, and cash. He drew no salary from the fund. Eli Hartman leased 240 acres debt-free under a conservative crop share and rebuilt slowly, exactly as planned. He carried reserve equal to 1 operating year and had not missed a payment on his fund note. Denise Kroll and Jared Kroll retained family ground, including the 190 acres repurchased through Cody's cost sale. They were current on every scheduled payment, current on taxes, and current on vendor terms. Their equipment line was smaller, older, and finally manageable. Marvin Pike worked full-time as a machinery diagnostic technician with no outstanding farm liabilities. He owned his home free of mortgage by 2025 and still ran January maintenance sessions for younger growers. Reuben Salas retired in Waterloo after settling restructured debt. He helped Mateo with books during planting and watched from the side instead of signing guarantees. Mateo Salas stayed on plan, expanded only when stress case numbers allowed, and became one of the strongest mentors in the program for first-generation operators. Lena Veenstra remained on the fund advisory committee and handled recipient welfare check-ins with quiet firmness that reminded older farmers of her father, Harold. Paul Norum continued as accounting oversight, publishing annual program arithmetic in plain language. Iris Malloy maintained legal structure, default protocols, and fairness terms, so no desperate season could quietly turn good policy into bad precedent. Wade Mercer consulted full-time on used equipment economics, taught lower leverage planning publicly, and stopped earning from high-interest farm paper. In practical terms, he became a late ally to the exact philosophy he once challenged. If you want stories where numbers settle arguments better than slogans, subscribe and stay with this channel. If this account leaves you with one hard question, write it in the comments. What fixed payment in your life would become dangerous after one bad season? Share this story with one person who mistakes modest living for failure, especially if they think wealth always arrives in new paint and loud engines. At dawn the next day, Cody measured coffee into the same dented percolator, waited for the first rise of steam, and wrote 2 lines in his ledger before heading to the field. Mug cost, 0.11 for grounds. Notes due today, 0. The truck door was still white primer against faded blue. The coat was still patched. The acres were still paid for. The fund was still lending. The families were still on their land. Appearance had said one thing for years. Arithmetic had said another. Arithmetic was right. Arithmetic was right, and Cody treated that line as a work order, not a slogan. He snapped the ledger shut, set the steel cup by the sink, and drove the faded Ford out to a rented quarter where Eli Hartman was already waiting beside a seed tender with his gloves tucked into his back pocket. The wind still had winter in it. Eli handed over a folder with tabs in blue ink. Acres, contracts, input prepay, reserve. Cody read in silence, then tapped one line with a calloused finger. You kept the buffer. Eli nodded once. 1 full year. Cash. They loaded seed and talked through rainfall probabilities, not pride. 3 days later, in Iris Malloy's office in Cedar Falls, Denise Kroll slid a check across polished wood for $55,733, the annual payment on the 190 acres Cody had bought for $836,000 and sold to the Kroll family at cost. Jared sat beside her with a binder of service records and fuel logs, that now looked cleaner than any brochure forecast they had once trusted. Iris read the receipt amount aloud, stamped it, and handed Denise a copy. Denise exhaled and laughed softly at herself. Second year. No deferment clause used. Cody only said, "Keep doing what works." The signed note went back into the fireproof cabinet where every payment had been logged. No loose paper, no mystery. By the end of March 2026, the Jennings Working Acres Fund held its quarterly review in a machine shed converted for meetings. Folding chairs in 2 rows, coffee urn hissing near a parts washer. Paul Norum projected the numbers on a white sheet clipped to a beam. Total disbursed since launch, $3,104,000. Principal repaid, $2,214,600. Outstanding performing balance, $889,400. Delinquency over 30 days, 1.9% by dollar volume. Administrative expense ratio, 1.7%. Active recipients, 26. Acres stabilized under direct recipient management, 7,480. He paused and translated it the way Cody preferred. $1 in fund support has protected about $2.41 in farm equity at current county valuations. That same afternoon, the mentorship line item that Cody had forced into every agreement showed its full weight. Eli introduced 2 younger operators, Noah Pritchard and Lynn Ortega, both running under 300 acres, both carrying 0 machinery notes after declining financed packages that would have added a combined $8,420 in monthly fixed payments. Denise and Jared reported that their 2 mentees had adopted quarterly reserve targets and cut annual fuel burn by 9.4% through fewer tillage passes. Marvin Pike presented workshop logs. 43 attendees that winter, 119 documented preventive repairs completed before planting, estimated emergency repair avoidance of $132,000 across participants. Mateo Salas showed stress case plans from 3 first-generation growers and pointed to the same rule in each one. Base decisions on weak prices, not hopeful ones. If you wanted one moment where generosity became arithmetic, it happened when Paul ran the multiplier on the screen. The first $120,000 to Eli had not stayed with Eli. Through his mentees and their mentees, it influenced 1,140 acres, prevented at least 3 high-interest equipment contracts, and reduced projected fixed obligations by $612,000 over 7 years. Denise's combined support package of $124,000 had anchored 690 acres directly and another 520 through mentorship, while preserving vendor credibility that translated into $27,600 in annual prepay discounts across 3 operations. Marvin's $44,000 transition loan had produced 12 winter classes in 4 years and a measurable reduction in breakdown borrowing across the county. One disciplined intervention had become a network effect. Wade Mercer's final resolution did not arrive in a dramatic hallway apology. It arrived on a Tuesday night in June at the Community College Ag Room in Waterloo, fluorescent lights buzzing, 57 people seated with notepads while Wade stood beside a slide titled Payment Schedules and Weather Risk. He wore a plain work shirt with no dealership logo. On the table in front of him lay 2 artifacts he had brought on purpose. An old financing placard from 2012 and the yellow legal pad he had folded at the foreclosure sale. Midway through his talk, he held up the pad and read Cody's line in his own voice. Payment schedules do not care about weather. Then he showed 3 anonymized debt service charts, including one from his former sales model, and one from a repair-first strategy that stayed solvent through weak years. He did not excuse himself. He did not perform shame. He taught the correction. 6 months after that session, Wade's consulting books were full, mostly with families who wanted used equipment planning and covenant-safe growth. He published a 1-page worksheet with Iris and Paul that forced side-by-side comparison of financed purchase cost versus staged repair cost over 5 years, including insurance and downtime assumptions. In his first year using it, 42 operations reported canceling or downsizing planned financed purchases worth a combined $9.3 million. Wade's income was lower than his peak commission years, but stable. His reputation, rebuilt slowly, rested on giving the caution early instead of after contracts were signed. By harvest 2026, roll call in Marshall, Grundy, and Blackhawk could be done name by name with no missing entries. Cody Jennings was 72, still in the same house, still using the steel drawer envelopes for seed, fuel, repairs, property tax, insurance, household, reserve. The yellow bulb above the kitchen table still flickered once before settling. The burn mark from his father's soldering iron and the wrench gouge were still visible under clear varnish his sister had brushed on during a summer visit. The clipped foreclosure listing from 2019 was now filed in the fund archive binder beside the trustee verification letter, the document that once startled a room and later became a teaching tool. Eli Hartman now operated 320 acres, 240 leased, and 80 on a long-term purchase contract he could service under stress case assumptions. He remained current on every fund payment and carried reserve equal to 1.2 operating years. Denise and Jared Kroll were current on taxes, current on vendor terms, and current on the 15-year note, with annual machinery burden held under $102,000 despite rising parts prices. Marvin Pike owned his home free and clear, worked 4 days a week by choice, and kept running January maintenance sessions with the waiting lists. Reuben Salas stayed retired in Waterloo, tended a garden, and reviewed Mateo's quarterly books over Sunday coffee. Mateo had completed his original loan schedule ahead of term and joined the fund screening committee as a volunteer reviewer for stress case plans. Lena Veenstra remained the quiet backbone of recipient check-ins. Paul Norum still published plain-language annual reports. Iris Malloy still guarded legal discipline with no favoritism. Cody's own equipment row looked much as it had when people misread him, except cleaner. The International Harvester 1086 remained in seasonal service for lighter tillage. The 2001 combine, hours documented and preventive work logged, had crossed another harvest without a major failure. The 1997 Ford, now beyond 430,000 miles, still wore the white primer passenger door. He had considered repainting it once, then spent the money on tile repair for a recipient field with drainage trouble. Net worth at the 2026 audit stood higher than the prior year, but Cody still drew no salary from the fund and still kept household spending narrow enough to fit on one line in his ledger. Late in October, after the last beans were hauled and the yard finally went quiet, he sat at the same scarred table, while dawn moved from gray to gold beyond the window. He measured grounds into the dented percolator, listened for the first soft rattle, and wrote the day's opening figures with the same mechanical pencil he had used all season. Grounds per mug, 0.11. Filter and heat, 0.02. Debt service due today, 0.00. Fund calls scheduled, 3. He picked up the phone and made each one, confirming a payment receipt, approving a Repair First grant, and reminding a new recipient that mentoring hours were due by month end. Each call ended with the same short line. keep your records tight. The final image was not a banquet and not a headline. It was a rusty truck easing down a gravel lane at first light, while a younger farmer in a patched jacket followed behind in an older tractor bought with cash, both engines steady, both ledgers current. In 3 counties, people had finally learned to separate appearance from balance sheet, noise from durability, growth theater from real security. The man with the 11-cent coffee had never been poor. He had been patient. He had been precise. He had been free long enough to make other people free.